Hello, everyone, and welcome to my lecture about the Japanese print show at Highfield Hall. Let me just share my screen. So even before I begin speaking about these 5 women, I would like to tell you a little bit about CWAJ and Japanese prints and myself. First of all, thank you to everyone at Highfield Hall and CWAJ for making this exhibition possible. I would particularly like to thank Joanne Fallon, too. Going forth, when I say or refer to the College Women's Association of Japan, I'll be using the term CWAJ. CWAJ was founded in 1949 by groups of American and Japanese women who were desirous to foster better understanding between the two countries after a particularly difficult World War. Initially, the group's activities were myriad cultural activities to promote understanding. Gradually, their activities evolved to a juried print show, the CWAJ print show, which was launched in 1956. And we were going to be devoting some time to that today. But before I talk a bit about that, I just need you to understand the importance of CWAJ and its print show. The CWAJ's scholarships, the awards have totaled over 1 billion yen. Yes, they have raised for 1 billion yen and granted awards to more than 870 scholarship recipients, both Japanese and non-Japanese, both for travel overseas and for people to come to Japan and learn about art. It's a wonderful organization. As I said, it was founded in 1949. And in 1956, so after the US occupation, thanks to the assistance of prominent authors like James Michener and Oliver Statler, who themselves were collectors of Japanese prints, and to the gallerist Abe Yuji, CWAJ launched its first print show. It was a juried print show. The jury would consist often of renowned printmakers, collectors, curators, very, very infrequently dealers. And artists would submit their work, which was subject to several rounds of selection. The selected prints were then put on view, and the show has been going on for years. It's usually held around the 3rd week in October. The catalog, which accompanies each year's show, is a wonderful reference work for contemporary Japanese prints. I remember as a little girl being so excited to be able to attend a CWAJ print opening. We waited in line, eager to see what this year's selections would be. And I was always excited to see what my parents would choose. So this is giving you a little bit idea of what CWAJ is, and we're so fortunate that this is the 3rd exhibition that they've chosen to do at Highfield Hall, which is such a wonderful venue. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about Japanese prints in general. There are many, many types of Japanese prints, of course, now, but initially, people always thought of Japanese prints as being woodblocks. And in fact, the woodblock tradition in Japan is quite old. In 764, Empress Shoken commanded that almost 1 million miniature pagodas be created, and inside each one be placed a woodblock printed little scroll of a Buddhist prayer to commemorate the successful suppression of the Omi rebellion. Just think, as far back as the 8th century, printmaking was already being used as a way to disseminate information. Still later, of course, these first wood blocks, we have to remember, were printed in black and white. Color printing didn't really come into its heyday until the 16th, 17th centuries in Japan. And ukiyo-e, which is the nomenclature for this type of printmaking of the historic prints, is often translated as pictures of the floating world. Floating can be related to the Buddhist concept of impermanence, the ephemerality of beauty. On our first slide, we're looking at 3 very different images. One, a beauty picture, a bijinga by Utamaro, and the other 2 are probably by now world famous images of iconic landscapes by Hokusai. I recently watched a webinar via the British Museum, which mentioned that 60% of known historic prints were of landscapes. So that means that the other 40% is that they could be of beauties, could be of actor prints depicting historic scenes. But with the emergence of a successful middle class, people all of a sudden had more chance to travel. And often these landscapes depicted destinations where people might actually want to travel to. So again, prints as more information. Traditionally, prints were created by a team of people. The artist would conceive of a design. That design would then be handed over to the carver. Usually the carver had the design on a thin piece of paper, which he would paste the thin sheet of paper onto a block of wood, usually cherry wood, carve the design into the block, which was then handed over to the printers, who inked the block. Every color had to be printed separately. And then the publisher would distribute the final product. As I mentioned, in addition to landscapes, there were other genres of printmaking. There were the beauties, and these could be used much as we look at fashion magazines today. People could see a picture of a kimono bedecked beauty and think, oh, I like that kimono pattern, and I will go off to the nearest kimono shop and order that same design for my kimono. There were also actor prints featuring the hottest stars of the kabuki theater, and people collected them in the same way almost that we collect playbills today. As woodblock printing became more and more entrenched as an art form in Japan, Japan itself changed. And in 1868, when Japan opened to the outside world, the publishers of prints realized that here was a whole new market. Foreigners who would find these beauties exotic, and they would find the landscape prints beautiful enticements of an unknown land. From ukiyo-e, we then transitioned into shinhanga, or the new prints, which were often created mostly for the export market. Directly after shinhanga, a young artist named Yamamoto Kanae had the idea, and this is usually dated to about 1909, that artists should be responsible for the entire process. Sosakuhanga, or creative prints, stemmed from this idea. All of a sudden, artists were responsible for having their own idea, carving the blocks, printing, and quite often self-publishing the work if they didn't have a gallery or a publisher that they worked with. For the sake of time, I'm going to leap ahead several decades and take us right to 1956. 1956, the year of the first CWAJ print show, and also the year of the first meeting of the Joryu Hangakai, Joryu Hangakai is Japanese Women Printmakers Association. And in this picture, which was taken at one of their first exhibitions, are the founders, these 9 women who founded the Joryu Hangakai the same year as the CWAJ's first print show. The red arrow on the left indicates Yoshida Chizuko. The red arrow on the right indicates Iwami Reika, 2 artists about whom I will be speaking later. Again, I mentioned an introduction about the CWAJ, and now I need to mention the impetus or the inspiration for today's lecture. The first CWAJ print show was in 1956. Last year, 2024, the CWAJ celebrated its 75th anniversary, and they decided that at the same time as the print show, they would also have an associate show featuring 5 stellar women printmakers. These women are all different from one another. I think that some of them may have known each other. All 5 of them might have been aware of each other, but not necessarily known each other. I am very fortunate to have known 3 of the artists who are no longer with us, and the sole survivor I just met last month, so I could prepare for this talk. But the first artist I'm going to talk to you about today, Tatsuno Toeko, I never had the pleasure of meeting. She was born after the Second World War and initially was very influenced by American artists. She often cited as her influences Jasper Johns and Roy Lichtenstein. Over the years, she became more confident in her own work, and she was fortunate to study at Tokyo Gaidai, one of Japan's most prestigious art universities. In Japan, this often makes a big difference. Artists are often quick to list where they studied and with whom they studied. It is part of the, I think, Asian tradition of being connected in this professor-student relationship. Tatsuno-san, from learning a lot from Western artists, chose to follow her own path eventually and struck out looking at abstracted forms of natural shapes. She was incredibly lucky to be the first artist, the youngest artist, to have a solo exhibition of her work at the Tokyo National Museum of Modern Art when she was only 45. And the subsequent year had the great distinction of receiving the Mainichi Prize for painting. Again, the only woman, the first woman to have received that honor. I don't know so much about her as a person. So looking at the work, I found myself intrigued about the colors that she had chosen, the repetitive shapes that she chooses in her work. They're interesting to me, and yet I can't quite figure out if I like them or not. I think technically they must be difficult to make and interesting to look at. And I'm very sorry that I never had a chance to meet this person who, still a decade after her death, continues to be part of major museum retrospectives about the past 50 years in Japanese art. I mentioned meeting someone just last month so I could do this talk, and this person is Yanagisawa Noriko. It was very exciting to track down her phone number, and Eiji from our gallery in Tokyo called her and mentioned that I was preparing this lecture and would it be possible to meet. I knew instantly that I would like her when she breezed into the Japanese restaurant where we were having lunch on the Ginza and said, "Oh, this all looks delicious, but next time let's go Italian so we can drink wine." Indeed, Yanagisawa-san is a very international person. Her husband worked for the government, and she has enjoyed a certain amount of recognition because of that position. She has also traveled extensively and lived extensively overseas. She spent 4 years in New York working at the Bob Blackburn printmaking workshop, a seminal time for her. It was the first time for her to meet any African American people, and it made her think about the world in a different way as she noticed the human condition. The human condition ended up informing a lot of her work as well. Here we see her at her printing press at the Kudo studio. Yanagisawa-san has said that even though she did a lot of her prints on her own as a young woman, as she's gotten older, she collaborates with the Kudo press in Tokyo. Her work is a mixture of etching and woodblock. Some of it seems to me gritty and harsh. It's rough. You'll see there's, even though this one is called Garden at the Waterfront, there are disembodied images floating in this work. The colors are bright and cheerful, but yet it doesn't have a sense of joyful happiness emanating from the work. Yanagisawa-san sees a lot of inhumanity in our times. She traveled to Chernobyl, and this series, Words Spoken by Animals, Life 2, or in this one, Life 3, speaks to helpless creatures wandering through a wasteland, not of their own making, but one in which they need to live. One of her motifs happens to be the wolf, which, as we know too, is being limited by man and constrained. With its wings taken off, some art critics have spoken about Yanagisawa-san's work as reminding them of the Greek myths of Prometheus who was chained, or Icarus who flew too close to the sun and had his wings burned. One of her symbols, her signature motifs, is the hawk. She admires its strength and notes its cruelty, but says that that is also part of the human condition. I was delighted to meet her because it gave me a better sense about her work, because I've seen her work for a very, very long time without meeting the person. So our quick and joyful lunch was a really wonderful introduction to her personality. I mentioned Yoshida Chizuko's name as one of the women pointed out in the photograph at the beginning of this presentation. Yoshida Chizuko married into the Yoshida family. This is a 3-generation family of woodblock printmakers. She had started out by painting in university, and then was very interested once she met her husband's family, who were all woodblock printmakers, to try that process herself. Her in-laws, Yoshida Hiroshi and Yoshida Fujio, are very known in American museums as being one of the first Japanese couples to come to the United States at the turn of the 20th century, bringing their prints and prints by their friends, crisscrossing the United States, doing multiple trunk shows to promote the cause of Japanese prints. The family kept on traveling, kept on exploring overseas destinations as inspiration for their work. Here is the Taj Mahal in the background. Here's Chizuko in front of Ayers Rock in Australia. This photograph goes back to, I always like to see the artists working. I think it's interesting to see that out of such order, or actually out of such disorder, that people make such beautiful work. Chizuko enjoyed all different types of processes, and she worked a lot with abstraction, but going back and forth. The Jama Masjid refers to a trip that she took overseas in the 1960s with her family. Her daughter Ayomi told me when I emailed Ayomi a few weeks ago to mention that I was doing this talk, that I should be sure to mention that Chizuko will be the focus of an exhibition at the Portland Art Museum in Portland, Oregon, starting this fall. Portland has a wonderful collection of contemporary Japanese prints, and it's really exciting that their curator, Jeannie Kenmotsu, is bringing more attention to Japanese women printmakers. Dr. Kenmotsu was actually the one who did the beginning research on the Joryu Hangakai. Woodblock printmaking lends itself to repetition, and I could almost hear the wind blowing through this field of flowers. But Chizuko didn't always just focus on abstraction. Butterflies were a common theme for her. She found them feminine and delicate and also fleeting. Here's some earlier work by her. I was fortunate enough to see her right before the end of her life, and she was very happy to be bustling about, her daughter attentive at her side, reflecting back on her incredible artistic career, not only as an artist herself, but as part of an artistic family. Iwami Reika is one of the artists I have known since I was a young girl. I always loved talking to her because even though she was quite petite in stature, she had a steel core in her center. Her main focus, I would say, I don't think she ever did any other technique in printmaking besides woodblock. She lived by the ocean in Hayama and would very frequently pick up bits of driftwood that she would ink. You'll see eventually in some of the slides a fisherman's net that she has always inked. But I remember always thinking when I was a teenager, oh, Iwami-san is so petite and delicate. When I was on my junior year abroad in college, I was in Paris, and my parents decided that the family would come to Paris to celebrate Christmas, and Iwami-san, upon hearing this plan, decided that she would come along too. My parents put me in charge of shepherding the artist around because it was, after all, my city. And I decided as an earnest 21-year-old that what Iwami-san would most like to see would be the Louvre. So Iwami-san and I set off on a cold December day. We eagerly made our way to the Mona Lisa room because I felt that's what all tourists would want to see. And after staring earnestly at the Mona Lisa for a while, I turned to Iwami-san to make some, what I hoped would be educated remark, when to my great amazement, I couldn't find her. I searched the gallery, I searched the hallways, I went to the Louvre Lost and Found department. No Iwami, no artist, and there were throngs of people in the museum for the Christmas holidays. An hour later, I returned back to the apartment where my parents said, "What did you do with Iwami-san?" And I had to confess that I had lost her. We sat around thinking, what could we do? Does she know any French? Does she know the address? When, to our great amazement, the doorbell rang, and in breezed Iwami-san, saying that she had had a delightful afternoon walking around, that she felt that she had a really great sense of Paris, and that she was sure that this was just going to be a wonderful holiday. This I may not have mentioned that at the beginning of Iwami's career, she was a doll carver, and this is a doll titled Salvia, after the salvia flower, that Iwami-san gave to me after that Paris trip, which I have donated to the Portland Art Museum in honor of Dr. Kenmotsu for all of her work on Japanese women printmakers. Even though the artist was tiny, her work was strong. Because of living in such proximity to the water, a lot of her titles have to do with the water, with ripples of water, with light on water, with shadows. Here you can see actual driftwood that has been inked and then used as literally the block of wood, the matrix for her images. They're strong, these works. They're not particularly delicate or feminine. They have a very elemental, organic quality to them, which I think has endeared them to so many collectors over time. Here you can see the aforementioned fisherman's net that she would have taken a piece of and inked and pressed into the paper. She, like Chizuko, enjoyed using embossing as a technique to bring forth the qualities of the handmade paper she used. And she told me that she had a little tiny wooden stick. She would moisten the paper and then with this stick create ridges in the paper. She just felt it gave the whole composition more texture. In later years, Iwami-san printed less and less. She took up swimming lessons. She used to like to write poetry every day. But on every occasion when I spoke to her, her strong, indomitable spirit shone through. Here you can see in this image at the lower left what looks like a butterfly. And I would always ask Iwami-san about this shape. It recurs occasionally in her work. And she would say, you could see a butterfly. Or you could also see when you throw a stone into the water and the water splashes back on itself. I'm not telling you which one it is. Lots of mysteries in her work. The black, many people have commented on how black her blacks are. And she said that she would usually print the black at least 6 to 8 times to get that kind of velvety blackness. She felt it was also a better way to show the texture of the wood grain in the subsequent images. The final woman I'm going to talk about is probably the artist I knew and loved the most, Toko Shinoda. You can see from her life dates that she lived a good long time. She passed away just a few weeks shy of her 108th birthday. She was aware up until probably the last week of her life about all sorts of things going on in the world and was in fact an incredibly well-informed and articulate person with whom to have a conversation. She could talk about baseball, she could talk about classical music. Once, when I introduced her to the curator of Japanese art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Dr. Carpenter, she immediately began speaking with him about the 14th century poet Kino Tsurayuki. She was an incredible person. Born at that time, Shinoda-san didn't have much opportunity for formal education. She studied calligraphy with her father starting at the age of 5. These pictures, the picture on the left shows Shinoda-san probably in Boston during the time that she came to the United States in the 1950s. At that time, it was very hard for Japanese nationals to travel easily to the United States, but her older brother had a friend who was working in New York, and so he could serve as a sponsor. On the right, we see Shinoda, who up until that point had been known for her calligraphy and for her abstract painting, actually tracing a design on a lithographic stone with the master lithographer Arthur Flory, depicted or shown at the far right. Arthur Flory traveled to Japan in 1960 with a grant from the Japan Society in New York to teach lithography and set up shop actually right next to the Yoshida family. We've just talked about Yoshida Chizuko. His studio was right next to the Yoshida family home in Shinjuku. And Shinoda-san, I can only imagine, would have been curious to find out about this new technique. Mr. Flory told her that her very gestural paintings would work well as lithographs. Arthur Flory subsequently wrote back to his wife, "Wow, these Japanese artists are fast. Give them a stone, and they come up with a design in 10 minutes." During her time in New York, Shinoda was very fortunate to be befriended by the Japanese abstract expressionist painter Okada Kenzo and his wife Kimiko. Okada-san made sure that she met a lot of the important gallerists in New York so that she would have a place to show her work. And as Shinoda-san liked to tell me, and Mrs. Okada made sure that I got 3 square meals a day. As a struggling artist, and often without money between shows, sometimes I would stop by their house right around dinner time, and Mrs. Okada or Kimiko-san would always say, "Oh, please stay to dinner." Well, I couldn't say yes right away, but when she had urged me 3 times, I could drop all pretense and then happily stay, knowing that I would have a good dinner. Here are a few lithographs that depict Shinoda's work. And Shinoda-san, unlike other artists who, when they pull their editions, there is nothing added on afterwards. And also, most of the artists that we've looked at did their own printing. Shinoda-san collaborated with the master printer Kimura Kihachi until he retired in 2007. She would trace the design on the plate. He would then print copies to make sure that she was satisfied. Once her approval had been granted, he would print the edition, and then she would add color by hand afterwards. She always said that each of her lithographs is an original. We have just seen Reminiscence previously, which shows an abundance of vermilion red. She had a huge ink stick of vermilion, which she used to tell me, "When this is gone, I will die." And I remember as a young person saying to her, "Well, just do black and white." Anyway, another principle that she espoused was yohaku, the abundance of space. You leave the sheet blank so that you notice the strokes that have been brushed onto the paper. It's simple, it's elegant, and it's very, very deliberate. While working, she often listened to music, and in several of her pieces, I feel the distinct presence of musical notes. Here, we're looking at some calligraphy that she's added onto her layered shapes. Her favorite color to use as a counterpoint to the black was red, but I thought it would be interesting to show some that have blue in them. Here's some more red. She was an absolutely wonderful person. When Kimura-san passed away shortly after his retirement, she was really thrilled to go back to just making paintings. And she said that the lithographs expressed a different part of her personality, but that she always felt that she was more a calligrapher and a painter. But we are lucky to have so much of her work available in lithographs. This picture was taken when Shinoda-san turned 100. She was at an exhibition waiting for the Empress to come into the room to walk through the exhibition with her. You can see from her regal posture that she was a very elegant, formal person. But at the same time, I knew her as a delightful, wonderful, happy artist who was always ready for a giggle and a chat and a cup of tea. Thank you so much for listening to my few words about these artists. I hope you'll let me know if you have any questions, and I hope that you will enjoy the show at Highfield Hall, which goes well until the fall. Thank you so much.